Hey, happy Friday. This week, the TikTok ban is back in the US with more layers than ever. Apple capitulated to the European Union, and the Galaxy S24 series has a surprising winner. Welcome to the Friday Checkout. This video is sponsored by Bellroy. We start the brief with newly launched phones, including the Asus Zenfone 11 Ultra. Unlike previous Zenphones, this is no longer a compact device and just appears to be an ROG Phone 8 reskinned to appeal to people who are not hardcore gamers. The price tag of $899 is actually pretty aggressive, but let's hope that the compact form factor isn't completely gone forever. And next, in phones, Samsung also announced the Galaxy A35 and 55 mid-range models. These look like pretty capable phones, starting at 380 and 480 euros respectively, though surprisingly the A55 won't be making it to the United States this year. Oh well. Moving on, OpenAI seemingly leaked their own GPT 4.5 Turbo this week. This new AI model would double the token context window of GPT-4 while also being speedier, more accurate, and scalable. And in more AI news, 5 stories of the 45 finalists of the 2024 Pulitzer Prize disclosed that AI was used in their creation. Now, this could mean that they just used it to translate things or transcribe interviews or whatever, but AI truly is everywhere. Next, Speedometer 3.0 was announced as the new cross-platform web browser benchmark with contributions from Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Mozilla. You can run the benchmark yourself with the link in the description, and if you do, you can also leave your scores down in the comment section. And talking of browsers, Brave, Firefox, and Vivaldi also downloads Surge in the European Union after Apple finally started letting users choose their default browsers with the latest iOS update. It seems like regulation is creating competition, at least on this level. And while we are at the EU, regulators have now also passed the planet's first sweeping AI regulations. There are still a few steps before the so-called AI Act becomes law, but the idea is to put guardrails on AI uses where people and privacy could be harmed and to completely ban the riskiest forms. Next, in a bit of good news, the state of Oregon passed a right to repair legislation that would stop parts pairing, which is the process of using software locks from replacing hardware parts, like Apple does in their iPhones, for example, and that's a pretty big deal. And finally, for the brief, Microsoft continues to slowly turn Paint, of all things, into a viable graphics editor, this time by completely overhauling how brushes work, and also by adding better ways to manage backgrounds, while the company also thankfully announced finally merging all of their various Teams apps into a single client. Hallelujah! Okay, my first big story of the week is that the TikTok ban in the United States is back on the menu again, and it seems more serious than ever. This week, the US House of Representatives voted to pass the so-called Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary-Controlled Applications Act. I guess you could call it the PAFACA, but that's a pretty terrible acronym, so you have to choose a better name, something like the CHIPS Act or the DREAM Act did, for example. Those are good acronyms. Anyway, the act would give the US president real powers to declare that a platform like TikTok, which in theory can be influenced by the Chinese government, should be banned in the United States unless it is sold to new owners. Lawmakers are still debating whether such a law would even be constitutional, but the bill has rare support from both sides, and Biden says that if it makes it to his desk, he will sign it. Meanwhile, the most surprising wildcard is that Trump, who originally wanted to have the TikTok ban, is now reportedly against it. Apparently, Trump met with a billionaire GOP donor named Jeff Yes, whose company owns 15% of ByteDance and who has reportedly promised to make significant donations to Trump-aligned campaigns if he blocked it. Trump does admit that he has recently met Jeff, but says that they only did so briefly, and also says that he totally didn't mention TikTok at all. Sounds about right. I bet he just completely changed his own mind. Anyway, FACTA, as I like to call it, still has to go through the Senate and then also through various judges, but if it does, it would be a pretty big deal. Now, the most bizarre thing about all of this to me is that if the US gets its way and gets to force this sale, then they'll not only do so for the US part of the business, but also for the entire rest of the business, at least outside of China. Of course, we all know that China has its own separate platform by ByteDance called Douyin, but the rest of the world is one big shared network with the US in it, and splitting just the US part out would make both of the remaining platforms way less valuable than one combined one. So that's just not a real option for ByteDance. So if the US gets its way, then it can use its kind of national security interests that it declared itself to also get control over citizens outside of its country as well, which is just fundamentally pretty weird. Alright, moving on to my second story of the week, Apple has apparently capitulated to European Union regulators in perhaps the biggest way yet. The company has announced that it will now allow the so-called web distribution of iOS apps in the EU, which is what people generally refer to as sideloading, or basically installing an app without using any app store at all. So that's a huge deal, but there are of course some Apple caveats as well. To be eligible for web distribution, companies must be a member of good standing in the Apple Developer Program for 2 continuous years or more, and have an app that had more than 1 million first annual installs on iOS in the EU in the prior calendar year. Developers can only offer apps from their own developer account attached to their own domain. They must publish transparent data collection policies and a couple of more things. Also, Apple will still continue to collect the 50 cents of core technology fees, and they will most probably also scan your app for security issues. In other words, this is only going to impact some really large app makers, and there's still going to be plenty of guardrails there. Is this a step in the right direction, or are they still not going far enough? Let me know what you think. Okay, and for my third story of the week, we have a Samsung S24 series sales surprise. That's an alliteration if I've ever made one. So according to new data from Counterpoint, the S24 series has overall done 8% better globally than its predecessor. Interestingly, Western Europe grew at 28%, Korea at 22%, and the US at 14%, meaning Samsung is finally clawing a little bit of share back in developed markets where they have previously been losing it to the iPhone. And it gets even more interesting when we actually look at the model breakdown. The S24 Plus actually saw a jump of 53% over last year, driving basically all the growth, while the Ultra and the regular S24 remained mostly flat. Clearly, the fact that the Exynos chips made a return to the regular and the Plus models in most countries didn't hurt their sales much at all, and Counterpoint says that consumers are reacting really positively to the idea of an AI phone, so I bet that in the next year or two, every Android brand that you can think of will be pushing their AI features in their marketing as well. Okay, that's it for the news, but to wrap up, I wanted to show you one last thing that I think only somebody who takes their job as a product designer really seriously could come up with, which is this Bellroy wallet. Okay, so this is a slim wallet. I bet you've seen a few of these before, and you're wondering why I'm calling this one special. Well, on top of just looking and feeling incredibly nice from the first touch, the real magic is in this folding mechanism. So you have 2 sides, one of which holds your 2 most frequently used cards, and the other holds the rest, which is 6 more cards or 4 cards plus some bills. Because the 2 sides fold differently and because the opening is offset, you always know which side is which, even blindly, which enables this. A single motion opens the right compartment, grabs the right card, pulls it out, and then the magnetic trapdoor closes it automatically. 90% of what I use my wallet for is taking out my primary payment card, and I can do that blindly while looking at the cashier and in a single motion without ever having to go through a pile of cards or whatever. It is such a small thing, but it's also really clever, and every Bellroy product that I've tried was full of these incredibly thoughtful little design choices. Like if I was an iPhone user, I would consider going for this MagSafe wallet. It has the same beautiful leather finish, RFID protection, and magnetic trapdoor of the flip case, but you can of course also take it off your iPhone and expose this gorgeous leather case for other MagSafe accessories. The fit and finish is great both inside and out. And similarly, my Avenger backpack that I told you about a few months ago is also jam-packed with dozens of its own clever little design choices as well, and has held up incredibly well so far. This is clearly a company run by people who take product design very seriously, and it's also a certified B Corp, so the materials that they use are responsibly sourced too. The nylon and the polyester used in backpacks, for example, is made with 100% recycled materials, like plastic bottles and industrial nylon cutoffs, while the leather goods are made with leather using special dry tanning processes that they claim has helped them save over 15 million liters of water and so on. Using my link in the description, you can get a 10% discount on any of their products, so check them out. I hope you find something good, and I'll see you in the next episode.